Today we're reading Acts 19, verses 21 through 41. After these things were ended, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, After I have been there, I must also see Rome. So he sent into Macedonia 2 of them that ministered unto him, Timotheus and Erastus. But he himself stayed in Asia for a season. At the same time there arose no small stir about that way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation, and said, Sirs, ye know that by this craft we have our wealth. Moreover, ye see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods, which are made with hands. So that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worshippeth. When they heard these things, they were full of wrath, and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And the whole city was filled with confusion. And having caught Gaius and Aristarchus, the men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. And when Paul would have entered in unto the people, the disciples suffered him not. And certain of the chief of Asia, which were his friends, sent unto him, desiring that he would not adventure himself into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing, and some another, for the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not whether they were come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander beckoned with the hand, and would have made his defense unto the people. For they knew that he was a Jew, all with one voice, about the space of 2 hours, cried out, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. When the town clerk had appeased the people, he said, Ye men of Ephesus, what man is there that knoweth not how the city of the Ephesians is a worshipper of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Jupiter? Seeing then that these things cannot be spoken against, ye ought to be quiet, and to do nothing rashly. For ye have brought hither these men, which are neither robbers of churches, nor yet blasphemers of your goddess. Wherefore if Demetrius and the craftsmen which are with him have a matter against any man, the law is open, and there are deputies. Let them implead one another. But if we inquire anything concerning other matters, it shall be determined in a lawful assembly. For we are in danger to be called in question for this day's uproar, there being no cause whereby we may give an account of this concourse. When he had thus spoken, he dismissed the assembly. We're in the part of Acts that would coincide roughly with when Paul wrote his first letter to the Corinthians. In that letter, Paul tells them that he is going to stay in Ephesus a while longer, until Pentecost actually, the festival that occurs 40 days after Passover. You recall that was the festival being celebrated back in chapter 2 when the Holy Spirit was poured out. Paul also mentions in his letter that in Ephesus a great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries. We can see exactly what he's referring to here in chapter 19. In the last passage, we saw people leaving their sorcery and magic to follow Christ. We saw people being healed, people being delivered from evil spirits. But we also see the adversaries at work, as in today's passage. Paul has made up his mind that he wants to go back through Macedonia and Achaia, and then back to Jerusalem before going to Rome. He sends Timothy on ahead to Macedonia with one named Erastus, but he stays in Ephesus a little longer. And it's during this time that a revolt happens. As people learned about Jesus and followed him, they left their other gods. This wasn't good for those who were in the business of making shrines for these gods. And in Ephesus, Diana was the primary god. The silversmiths began talking about how Paul was hurting their business. Then they got people worked up, saying that if left unchecked, Paul would ruin the worship of Diana to the point that even the great temple built to her would be ruined and neglected. Then a mob mentality breaks out, and they start shouting, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. The mob then grabs 2 of Paul's companions, and even Paul is tempted to go try to quell this uprising, but several of the city leaders convince him to stay away. A man named Alexander is about to address the crowd, and they again begin shouting, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. They won't even listen. They just keep shouting for about 2 hours. Finally, the town clerk talks them down and tells them that everyone knows about Ephesus being the center of Diana worship. He also tells them to disperse, and that if they have any charges against Paul or any man, they will need to do that through the legal system and not by a riot. So again, God protects Paul and the other Christians from those who would cause them harm. But did you notice the important thing in this passage? The gospel ought to disrupt things. If we claim to follow Christ, but nothing in our life changes, we need to make sure we truly know Him.